Good morning and welcome to the Point. Over the past several weeks, we've been introducing you to the leadership in Lansing. The new makeup of the legislature means that there's a new Senate Majority Leader, a new Senate Democratic Leader, a new Speaker of the House. Only the Democratic leader over in the House is the same. We'll be talking with him in an upcoming show. But this morning, after talking to the Speaker of the House and the Senate Majority Leader and the Lieutenant Governor, we talked to the leader of the Democrats over in the Senate. Senator Jim Ananich is from the Flint area, and he, like all of the Senate leaders in the past several years, is in the minority. But still, his Democrats have a voice in what happens in Lansing over the next several months. We sat down with him to find out exactly what he would like to see happen, how he plans to work with Republicans, and so much more about what he thinks can happen in the coming legislature. Senator, let's start with where we are today. We know the governor will unveil his budget priorities next week, but before we even get there, we know there's a hole in the budget that you and Republicans on this end of the building and the same on the other end of the governor are going to have to come together on.
Yeah.
Where are we? Is it about $325 million this year?
That's about what we're hearing. Yeah, right around that range.
So where do you begin? Obviously, I guess you'll have to wait and see what the governor has to say, but
sure,
you and your caucus must have some ideas.
Well, I think, we've had discussions, on both sides of the aisle, both chambers, and I'm not trying to say that there's agreement, because there's not, but there seems to be a lot of somewhat consensus, so to speak, in a formal basis that we need to stay away from our schools, our local governments, and I like to make sure that we stay away from the most vulnerable. Now, the problem when you do that is then you got to find other areas to make cuts. So it's going to be a tough question. I mean, I think we really have to make sure that folks that are getting up every day, doing what they're supposed to do, going to work, and trying to make it aren't suffering because of these cuts.
Put that in perspective. Again, people have sometimes a difficult time understanding that they believe that there is a $50 billion budget for the state of Michigan, which is true, but most of that money is federal pass-through or other attached dollars that aren't at your disposal. You can't do anything.
No, it's I wish we could at times, but of that budget, there's a small fraction of money that we can actually move around and make cuts to. So we're somewhat limited to what we can do, and it's a difficult scenario, but I'm sure we'll find something as we go forward.
And if you take schools off the table, then it gets even smaller, because about half of what you have that is disposable would be schools.
Yeah.
So now you're into general fund money, which is what, $10 billion?
Yeah, it's about that, yeah.
So you're going to have to come up with $300+ million this year and then another $450 million next year. It's not as big as we've seen in the past, but it's still something to be dealt with.
No question about it. And schools, this is what a lot of folks just lump everything together. Sometimes they lump us with the federal government too, so it seems like an even bigger pot. But schools, there actually is somewhat of a fund balance, a little bit of a surplus. In the general fund, there's a deficit we have to deal with, and you can't take school money to fix and we shouldn't. We should make sure that money goes to kids. So it's going to be something we're going to have to deal with, and I'm hopeful that cooler heads can come together and find it in a way that doesn't really detrimentally hurt anyone over any other group.
We're pretty early in this session, but you've had a chance to get moved into the leader's office here. I know you've had a chance to have some session days. What is it like? What is the atmosphere like in the Senate? Because I've only been in a couple of times, but
sure,
every legislature has its own particular personality.
Yeah. The good thing about the Senate is the vast majority of us were reelected. There's a few new folks. All of them but one have served in the House, so I've served with everybody. Yeah, I'm in the unique position of serving with all the House members when I was still in the House before I won my special election, and then now all the senators that are there, and obviously Curtis Rattel, who was a Register of Deeds. I've had a long relationship with him, so I think there's an atmosphere of collegiality, an atmosphere of professionalism, of respect. We're not going to always agree, but that we're coming to a place of trying to solve Michigan's problems together when we can. And when we can't, we're going to respectfully disagree, and we'll be adamant about our positions, but they're going to be opposed at times, and that's okay.
When you look at the governor's State of the State, he laid out a number of different issues that he's interested in, including reshaping government to create this river of opportunity. Those are his words. That's what he's talking about. As you listen to that, did you find parts of that you said, under the right circumstances, I can work with the governor on this?
Oh, no question about it. I think me and my caucus members are trying to come to this year's session, this debate, so to speak, with a mindset of we want to get to yes, to vote yes on things. We'll be no when we need to, but we're not coming in saying, oh, we won't support this, we won't support that. It's much easier to come in and say, okay, let's find common ground. And let me give you an example. He's talked a lot about education, whether it be third grade reading, as opposed to failing students, getting there early, intervening at an earlier stage, and making sure that there's success. I think a success agenda around schools is much better than an agenda focused around failure, and also on the workforce development side, making sure that people, whether they're high school students or adults that are in between jobs or just not feeling satisfied in their career, can get to that status of underemployed or unemployed into a good paying job. I think there's ways to work together on those, and I think there's plenty of others we can too.
I talked to the governor earlier the week, and one of the things he talked about was removing obstacles for people who were either on government assistance or using the government in some particular area, get the obstacle out of the way to let people move forward. And part of the way he's going to try to do that is by combining a couple of pretty big departments, which is going to make something that isn't always easy for government anywhere to absorb, and that's change. But in doing so, he's going to try to make this one-stop shopping. How confident are you that he can make that work when you try to combine? I mean, you've worked in bureaucracies before, as I have. Change is not an easy thing to achieve.
No, I think conceptually, I understand the rationale for combining the Department of Community Health, which deals with a lot of healthcare issues, whether it be Medicaid or other things like that, and the Department of Human Services, what gives sort of the programs that help give people a leg up. Putting those together logically makes sense. Now you're looking at a few 100,000 people, you're looking at tens of thousands of employees. Now from trying to put this in a practical sense, it's very difficult. But, I think there's a pathway to doing it, and I think that the state Senate in particular should have some oversight in this, and it should be a conversation that's back and forth over the next few months. I think we have a responsibility to have oversight in this, and if it's going to be done, if it's something that he's determined to do, I think we should be there to make sure it's done right.
One of the other things the governor has talked about, some in the state of the state, but he's been talking about this for a while, and that's getting career technical education back on track in this state. Again, he talked this week, as he has in the past, about the fact that when he was in school, when I was in school, perhaps even when you were in school, we had pathways to technical training in high school.
Yeah.
In my school, there was a masonry, and there was a DECA class, and a vocational agriculture class, a number of different things. And some of my contemporaries went into those fields and actually made careers out of it.
No question about it.
But we have gotten away from that, at least from my observation, certainly from the governor's standpoint. I suspect you like the idea of trying to reestablish that.
Yeah, and I also think you still need to have high and rigorous standards, but I also think that if a student just isn't going to make it in the traditional setting, or chooses to do an alternative setting or a career voc setting, that's not a bad thing. I think for a long time we made it out to be that that was wrong, as opposed to finding each kid, as we know, anybody who's a parent or anybody who's ever worked in education like I did, kids are different, and some kids learn in certain ways, and some kids are best taught in different ways, and many kids thrive in hands-on. They've got a really brilliant mind, but sometimes the sort of traditional setting that leads to a college degree and then maybe go working in an office, this is not what they want. It's not what they're going to thrive in. And I think that you can do both. I think you can have a rigorous standard to make sure that we've got some of the best and brightest in the traditional sense in the world, and at the same time helping somebody become a CNC operator or a mechanic or whatever their dreams may be. I think you can do both, and I hope we can find a way to do that.
Well, and when you talk about rigorous standards, certainly that technical education is going to have to be to a rigorous standard, because manufacturing today isn't what it was even 20 years ago, certainly not what it was 40 years ago. And some of these high-tech jobs will go into fields that people may not have even thought about. Agriculture, for example, is increasingly high-tech and increasingly a big part of the Michigan economy. So
I think it should be a growing part of the economy. I think this is an area where the rural communities and the urban communities can come together. We're shipping a lot of our raw materials out of the state to be processed somewhere else and then sent right back here to be shipped all over the world, we should be doing that processing here in cities like Flint and Detroit and Saginaw, places like that, where we have the skilled workforce, where we have the logistics and transportation available. I mean, we're a farming state, whether some people want to admit that or not. It's one of the biggest parts of our economy, and I think we have a way to make it so that everybody can participate in that, or at least have the opportunity to.
Well, and that's what we've seen a lot of our further southern Midwestern states. They call it the value added. They don't send out the raw product. They don't send out potatoes. They send out potato chips. I mean, that's the kind of thing you're talking.
I think cities like Flint, where we have a good infrastructure from the days when we had the 80,000 automotive jobs, we have the transportation, we have the rail lines. Halifax in Canada is where so much stuff is being shipped around the world now. It's right on 69. You can get to it through Detroit or through the Port Huron bridges. I think we should be taking advantage of that advantage that we have as a state. We have the most diverse, I would argue the most diverse, other states would argue with us, but we have the most diverse crops. I think we have a huge advantage to continue to grow that part of our economy, and those are good paying jobs, and I think we should make that a priority.
Well, as far as that claim goes, I would tell you that the ranking member of the U.S. Agriculture Committee in the Senate would say that we have the second most diverse crop base in the country, and she's done some considerable work on that.
Yeah.
But beyond agriculture, let's talk a little bit about automotive, because the automotive industry is, in a relative sense, as strong as we've seen it for a while. Yet it doesn't look like the automobile industry did in 1962, and nothing else around us does either. No. But there are still areas, like some of the district that you represent, where the automotive industry was once king, and it now doesn't even hardly register a blip compared to what it once was. Is there still an opportunity to rebuild that infrastructure, or has that industry just moved to a different place?
No, I think we still have it. I think it's still an important part of our economy. I have about 8,000 to 9,000 jobs in my district. Obviously at one point in time we were in the 80s. 60% of my constituents at one point in time either worked or had a family member that worked, or probably even more than that. I think it's changing, but I think we can still be on the forefront of the technology and the entrepreneurial. You're seeing there was some research done, and some folks down in the Metro Detroit area that are working on the I'm going to screw the term up, but it's the cars that drive themselves.
Right.
Whatever it's called. I can't think of it right now. But that research should be done here. That we still have the expertise, and I think we could bring a lot of things can spin off of that sort of brain power that we have in Metro Detroit, Flint area, Saginaw, all across the state. So I think it still can be an important part of our economy. It's just going to be changed, and we just have to deal with that, unfortunately. I'd love to have the 80,000 jobs in my community. It made us, at one time, one of the richest and most wealthiest counties in the country. It's changed, and we have to deal with that, but I think it still can be a very important part of our economy.
As the Senate Minority Leader, Senator Ananich knows he'll have to work with Republicans to try to get some things done. And in fact, he and some of the other Democrats did just that in the lame duck session by coming up with a plan to perhaps fix Michigan roads. But as you'll hear coming up, that is not a sure thing, and he has concerns as well. We'll talk about that when we come back to the point. Welcome back to the Point. In Lansing, the legislature is just getting underway. This week, Governor Rick Snyder lays out his budget priorities, and as we have talked about, there are some budget deficits that he'll have to deal with both this fiscal year and next. But there is also the big issue of roads, an issue that was at least partially dealt with in the lame duck session of the legislature, but it's still up for a vote of the people. And that could mean that there is either an increase in the sales tax and money for roads, or nothing at all. We talked with Senator Jim Ananich about that. One of the things that you share in common in your district, that you share in common with Senator Hildenbrand or Senator Meekhoff or any other senator in this state, is that while we are the state that put America on wheels, we don't have a very good place to put our wheels here in Michigan. The roads, I was up in your area just prior to this last election, and I noted that they're no better than ours on the west side, and they're all crumbling. In lame duck, there was a plan that was put together that some believe would be an answer to fixing that, but we have seen in the past few weeks some, at least from my standpoint, you may correct me, some outward signs that this ballot initiative in may not be generating the kind of support, at least initially, that some had hoped. We had some polling numbers. We know some of those people who had been at least tentatively selected to go sell the plan are now no longer interested in selling the plan. What's your take on that plan and where we are?
Well, I was not privy to the people that were hired or the people that were let go or changes that were made, so it's hard for me to speak specifically about that. But I think the plan that we developed during the late hours of lame duck is a solid plan. I do think the governor needs to lead on it, though. I think the governor has been pushing for this for a long time, and he really needs to step up and take ownership of this plan and show people that this is a plan worth fighting for, and I think that'll help get people involved. He's going to have to get people that voted for me, that didn't vote for him, to vote for this in May. And we're not off to a good start yet. I think that this campaign really needs to ramp up, and he's going to really have to be more, to build a broader coalition, and I hope that happens soon.
That's one of the most intriguing things I've heard anybody say about this. The governor has to get people who voted for you, that didn't vote for him, to vote for this. Now, you have always been very conciliatory in your talk. You have always said you will agree where you can, and when you don't, you won't.
Yeah.
But if I put you and Rick Snyder in two chairs sitting right here, philosophically, you're not that close.
He'd probably be on the right side of me.
He would be on this side. So how do you get those people who voted for you to go along with this plan, understanding that there were some very specific things put in this plan to help get those people? $300 million more, for example, for schools, the replacement of part of the earned income tax credit.
Yeah, $30 million for at-risk, on top of the $300 million for schools, more money for revenue sharing. For that, which revenue sharing for those that we use that term a lot in Lansing is basically police and fire. That's where the majority of people's budgets are at, and that's the area where people feel the most strapped, and they feel that that's the area they want the most for their local government. There's a lot of really good things in there, and I think we're going to have to start communicating that in a way that makes people feel comfortable that they believe that it's actually there. I've had people that may potentially work on the roads. They're just hesitant of it. It's kind of complex, and it's what's going on with this. And I think the governor's going to have to really take a leadership role and then go forward with a plan that people understand clearly, and they can make a decision. Do I want the roads fixed? And do I want to have more money for schools? Do I want to make sure that my police and fire stay working in our communities? Do I want to make sure our kids that are struggling get that at-risk funding to help them get from where they're at to where they need to be? There's, the earned income tax credit, folks that are working every single day, helping put more money in their pockets so they can spend it in our community. At the end of the day, it was a pretty good compromise. Nothing's perfect, but but this campaign has got to get off the ground pretty quickly.
Politics is the art of the possible. This is what was possible, but the Senate was willing to do something much less confusing. I won't say convoluted, but much less confusing, much more direct. And some have suggested after the fact that it might not have been as solid a long-term fix, but it certainly would have been a more immediate fix and something that wouldn't have had to go to the voters by moving the tax to the wholesale side, raising that tax, generating the $1.2 billion over a shorter period of time. The House wanted no part of it. At the end of the day, you say this is a compromise that you think works, but would you still rather have had the original plan?
Oh yeah, no question about it. I think we were elected to do a job, and I think it's important for us to, there's tough decisions you have to make. It's easy to say no to everything. Sometimes you have to be willing to say yes to things that maybe you don't completely love, but that was what people asked us to do. The roads are crumbling, and to give people the false hope that if we don't do this, there's just magically enough money, it's just not the case. There's just not the money in the budget unless you're dramatically there's just not the money. Even if you did dramatic cuts to things that I can't even think of right now, you're still going to come up with a fraction. And I think telling people, the folks that did, although we can find it in the budget, they're either lying or they're at the very least being disingenuous, because it's just not there.
Well, and if we go back to our conversation a little bit earlier about how the budget is split up, to put it in perspective, to take $1.2 billion out of the money that's available That's more than 10% of all of the general fund money that is available to spend, and that's everything that you think of in government. So I mean, that's a big shift.
It's a big shift, and it needs to be there not just 1 year. It needs to be there and it needs to grow, because the roads are in such bad shape. In 1997, last time they raised this, they didn't put an inflationary mechanism in place. So the second they passed that money, the next year they didn't have enough. So we've been dealing with that every single year, and at some point in time, you have to just lead and make tough decisions. And I'm hopeful that this ballot initiative passes, but that was the reason so many of us were pushing for it so early last year. We didn't want to wait to the last minute, because if something like this, we're sort of relying on one single day about whether or not this is going to pass or not.
So I've got to ask the question that nobody in Lansing wants to answer. What happens if it fails?
That's a good question. I think nobody wants to answer because we don't know. And I hate, nobody in politics is supposed to say we don't know, but I mean, if we're going to be honest, it's a very tough question. I mean, there's a lot of really drastic cuts that would have to happen to even get a fraction of the money. And I could see us just, it's not something I want to see happen, but I could see us just saying we're going to put it aside for a while. And these roads are crumbling and the bridges are falling apart. And it's really getting to the point where it's very dangerous. And I think we have a moral responsibility to do something about it.
And I should point out that this is a package. I think there is only one element, which is the Main Street Fairness package, that will stay in place.
Yeah.
All of the rest of the stuff, the switching of the gas tax, the extra money for the things we just talked about, and the increase in the sales tax. If the sales tax doesn't pass, nothing goes into effect, with the exception of the Main Street Fairness,
yeah.
Right?
Yes, that's right.
And given the makeup of this new legislature, when you look down at the other end of the hall, particularly in the House of Representatives, do you see it more or less likely that you could come up with a deal?
I can't envision it, a scenario where we come up with a deal. They're much more conservative, much more radical. Some of the folks that came in, I mean, I'm just hopeful that we can get this, that the governor will step up and really show people why this needs to pass, and the coalition will be built. And I'm hopeful that it passes in May.
As leader of the Democrats in the Senate, Senator Ananich may find himself in an unusual situation, particularly if that ballot measure doesn't pass in May. If the governor and others want to try to put together a new deal, it may well take Democratic votes, and that could put him in a position of being able to leverage at least some bargaining power, but all of that remains to be seen. We'll be watching, of course, and we'll be back with more To the Point in just a moment. Speaker of the House, Senate Majority Leader, Senate Democratic Leader, Lieutenant Governor. We've talked to all of them in the past few weeks, and of course we'll be talking to the leader of the Democrats in the House coming up. It's to give you an idea about who is running the show in Lansing. But of course, with 38 members in the Senate and 110 over in the House, there are a lot of varying ideas. And in the weeks to come, we'll be talking with a lot of your representatives to give you an idea of what they're thinking. I hope you'll join us every Sunday morning To the Point.